Well, folks, I'm supposed to bore you to death now for a little while. And I could start and tell you how I became a reptile by going to Russia and as a do-gooder and finding out that it was just Satan transformed into light. It was a raw, horrible slave state. I won't go into that, but I want to say that the 30 years or so that I've spent, well, since 31, I guess it's 34 years, 32, 33 years that I've spent in this work, have only served to brighten and enlighten and put sparkle in the book of books. And I only wish everybody could have the renewed faith in that book that I have chiseled out for myself the hard way. When I was hearing about all this culmination here, we have Daniel, and we have Christ's Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, in which he says first, of course, I could have written the Olivet Discourse so much more reasonably than Christ wrote his, but he seemed to know a few things that I don't know, you know. I would have said, he began, you remember, he comes out and he says, the temple, not a stone will be left on it, and of course it was level to the ground. Titus dragged a plow over it in 70. Then he said the gospel would first go to all nations, and it has, and then I would have said, of course, that then the nations would be better and nicer and kinder, and they wouldn't kill each other, and it would be so much better. That would be in the reasonable way. But he didn't say that. Then there'd be a time of trouble such as never was and never would be again, that children would rise up against their parents and have them killed. Now, when I was a little girl, they didn't used to do that, but now every once in a while you're reading in the paper about children having their parents killed, aren't you? In Winnetka, right near us, there was a boy that killed his mother and father and sister. And that never happened in my knowledge before. And then, because wickedness would abound, that men would hate one another and betray one another, and because wickedness would abound, the love of many grow cold, but he who endureth unto the end, the same shall be saved. Well, now, wickedness is abounding, and it's a wonderful thing in a time when the educational system is loused up with atheism and every kind of anti-Christianity, that there's a little nook up here where people can come and have some inspiration, such as we've just had from Father Staskowitz. That was wonderful. That little as we are, we can be heard. I told him one of the encouraging things that had come to me was a lady told me she heard, you know, Otetka of the State Department, how he has been martyred for telling the truth about that horrible condition at the State Department, Otetka, that he said that he got his whole start in this anti-communist field that he's in by Elizabeth Dilling. Well, now, one of my books fell on fertile soil, and as we were just saying, you go out like a sower to spread the seed, and if it falls on good soil, you get a big crop, and if it falls on stony soil, you get no crop. Nobody knows but what the person's right in this little room today that will do more to enlighten the people and bring them to us a knowledge of the light than anywhere in the world. It isn't the size or the elegance of the buildings. Now, I went to the University of Chicago. I was just telling Mr. Hall about my experience. I had, there are a lot of things in the Bible that, well, they're hard to take. And I don't believe in just swallowing your faith down, but as Peter said, be always ready to have a reason for the faith that's within you. Be able to know why you believe it. Well, there were certain things that I didn't like in the Bible. And I had read in French, I read French books, that the history of paganism was in the History of Prostitution by Lacroix, and I went out to the University of Chicago 3 days and worked on it. There's 5 little French volumes, and then they made it non-circulating, and then I let them have a burst. I said, non-circulating? Of course, I said, these shelves are full of pagan literature. They glorify everything pagan here. But when something is exposing paganism in its true light, then it's non-circulating. The librarian looked at me as though I were queer or something. She listened to me. It poured. It just kind of came out automatically. I'd come about 20 miles to study those books, and I didn't like being turned down, you know. And I said, I believe that Christ came into a sewer of paganism. I'm not a progressive. I believe that he was the light of the world, past, present, and future. And that all this, well, anyway, I gave her some. She said, who are you? she looked kind of beaten down, and I said I wasn't a progressive, I wasn't a liberal, I was for Christ as the light of the past, present, and future, and so on. And she looked kind of, she hadn't been gone after like this. I said, I went here to school, they don't brag about it, and I don't either, University of Chicago. And I spent 3 hours on Hutchins, the head of the University of Chicago, giving the communist record of the school and of his teachers there before the Baker Committee, before the Senate, State Senate. And I said, I just came in here in the entranceway. They're glorifying the pagan discourses, I said, of Socrates and Plato, lectures on it. Why, I said, those old sodomists, I said, they glorified their pagan religion with dressed up prostitutes called heteri. And I'm for Christianity. And yet I said, that's culture plus with a capital C. You get the unabridged copies of Plato's dialogues, and you have that Socrates was exactly what they bumped him off for. But anyway, that's culture. If you want to be cultured, you have to read all this pagan garbage, you know. But Christianity is. So finally, she was so beaten down. I wasn't trying to get anything. I was just mad, that was all. And she said, are you Mrs. Dilling? And I said, don't push, I'll go. I've been put out of better places than this. And I don't like to have to brush off my clothes. And she said, I'll give you the books. And so I said, what'll it cost me, my front teeth or my right eye or what? She said, oh, you'll bring them back. I did, and I advertised through the Main Street bookstore, and I got a translation by a Jew, bought, and it's very illuminating on the Bible. It was written in 1825, but that isn't what I started in to say, but truly the universities are mountains of paganism. I don't know that it's any treat to send a young person to a college now. I kept up a constant struggle with my daughter. I didn't know who was going to win her mind, whether the stuff she was getting in the Northwestern University was going to be pull her that way, or whether she'd go my way, because I read the books they sent her home with, and they are marvelously subtle and clever. You know what I mean? For instance, I could mention a number of these books. And finally, she was afraid to tell me that she wanted to be engaged to this nice young man. And she told her friends, my word, I told my mother I'd kind of like to be engaged. She said, why don't you get married right now? And she thought that I'd want her to, go all through college. I didn't know who'd win if she went all through with that pagan onslaught of everything that I hate and disbelieve in. So I think we know that today in our educational system and everything else, we're fighting this deluge. Now, as Daniel said, he wrote of this time, it's wonderful how Daniel agrees with the revelation, But he said that those that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits, and those who understand among the people shall instruct many and bring many to righteousness and shine as the stars forever, but the wicked shall not understand. Now today there are voices here, there, and everywhere, and I hope everyone in this room is a voice for the truth and that can give the message to the world, because you have a wonderful place up here to get the truth. And as Father Steskowitz said, it's not the size of your importance in a worldly way, but the power of truth that comes out of you. And of course, there are parts of the Bible that are not understandable unless you've done some reading that hasn't been done by people. And one of them is all this diatribes of Christ in Matthew 23 and John 8 and all about the Pharisees. When we hear that Christ says, you're of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father you'll do. He was a murderer from the beginning and abode not in the truth, because there's no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he's a liar and the father of it. And you say, well, what's all that about? What could the Pharisees be that would be so bad as that? I guess they're a little sect, but they're all dead. Let's have a cup of coffee. We won't worry about them. Well, they're not dead. Here's the missing link. The Jewish religion as it is today traces its descent without a break through all the centuries from the Pharisees, who left a literature of enormous extent, much of which is still in existence, the greatest of which is the Talmud, a study of which is essential for any real understanding of Phariseeism. Well, now, boys and girls, I've spent many years reading that tradition of the Pharisees in written form. It was put into written form completely and finally in 500 A.D. at Sura in Babylonia. And they had Talmud academies in Pumbeditha, Sura, and Nehardia, And in 1040 AD, they moved out and loused up Europe with black magic. And, all that you get in history just isn't the way it is when you go back into Phariseeism. Now, Phariseeism is a combination of all the abominations denounced by the Old Testament and embalmed and permitted and put under a whited sepulchre and called Old Testamentism. It is not the Old Testament. Christ said, by your tradition you make the commandments of God of none effect. How can you escape the damnation of hell? Now, I could give you one illustration after another how they reverse every commandment of God. And it's those people that are in control of the red seventh world government. You know, the first world government was the Egyptian, under which Moses took people out back to Canaan. And the second was the Assyrian that took off the 10 tribes in 721 BC. And the third was the Medo-Persian under Cyrus. And the fourth was the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great, who died in 323 BC. And the fifth was I left out Babylonia. I left out Nebuchadnezzar. He was before Cyrus. And then the next one was the Greek one, and then the Roman with two legs. You know, the book of Daniel has one capital in Constantinople and the other capital in Rome. In 453, Attila the Hun went to the gates of Rome and made a deal with the Pope that he wouldn't sack the place, but the power of the left leg was gone. And exactly 1,000 years later, the Turks took Constantinople. It's now, the head of the Ottoman Empire. And in fact, it was a funny thing. I was going up to the Acropolis when we were in Greece, and I was feeding my kids at first so they wouldn't holler going up there, and a big fat Jewish woman came down the steps, and I said, "How is it up there?" And she says, "My goodness, such a ruin. In the United States they wouldn't let them keep so much good property vacant." Well, I was anxious to see what they were doing to all those great old pillars, 600 BC, and whatnot. My son that was in Constantinople not too long ago on a law case, and he said, "Mom, I've got a story that'll equal yours about Piraeus going up, to the Acropolis." He said there was a big bunch of New York Jews sitting in the table next to them. He had his wife with him, and they said, "What is it they got here in this place? What do they call Constantinople now?" It's, somebody tell me, you know the name of it, and so do I. What is it they got in this place? Istanbul, yeah. What is it they got in this place, this Istanbul, that's any good? Well, my son had been in a nationwide history competition, and he liked all those dates, names. I didn't until I got interested in the subject. But anyway, he reeled off all the stuff. He said, of course, there was the Christian period in which Paul was preaching at Ephesus, and then, of course, there was before that was the Roman period when it was the Eastern capital, and then, of course, the Ottoman Empire came in and made it this so and so and so and so. Well, he says, from what you say, they must have quite a valuable piece of property here. It became a household word when I'd feel punk or something. I'd say, "My goodness, such a ruin. In the United States, they wouldn't let them keep so much good property vacant." But these first, you remember Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel was told that there would be 4 to follow him, and 4 and 3 are still 7. I don't know why they try to make the Catholic Church the War of Rome, a Roman thing, because the first one was the Egyptian, the second was the Assyrian, the third was the Babylonian, the fourth was the Medo-Persian, the fifth was the Greek, and the sixth was the Roman, and the seventh, Christ said, there are 7 kingdoms, or world kings. 5 have fallen, 1's in power, and 1 is yet to come and goes into perdition. Now, he was talking at the time when the Roman Empire ran the known world, and it finished up finally in 1453. Now, there's been no one world kingdom. The next one goes into perdition. It's the satanic one. It's the red one. And now we have over 100 nations in a prayerless, godless confederation called the United Nations with the old symbol of Zeus, the sex god of perversion, as the only religious symbol there. And he stands in a shameful attitude there, and they had posts, I've been there several times, they had posts with chains on, and the little kids would go in to look up under it, Zeus, and there he stands there with his hands out like that. That's the only religious symbol. We've got, and it even says, the abomination that makes desolate, that he put the abomination in the temple. We've got the old abomination. You remember when they took over the temple, that the Maccabees took back, and they put the statue of Zeus in it, and they also offered pork to Astarte, the goddess of procreation. And then the Maccabees got mad and came in and cleaned Zeus out and threw him on his nose and dedicated the place back to God Almighty. Now we have Zeus as the emblem of the United Nations. Now, if I had 2 weeks, I could tell you every move that set up that United Nations. It was done by the Pharisees. Here is your missing link that no Christian that I hardly know of knows of. The Jewish religion as it is today traces its descent without a break through all the centuries from the Pharisees. Well, all right, what did Christ say about it? He said, you'll go out in Matthew 23, he gives them the works all the way through, just like knocking a lash at them. He said, I'll send you scribes and wise men and so on, and you'll kill and crucify, that upon you will come all the righteous blood shed from the foundation of the world, from the blood of the righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias, son of Barachias, whom you slew between the temple and the altar. Go to it. And when the final seventh world government, the red one, the Antichrist one, the godless one, falls, in the last verse of the 18th chapter, in her is found the blood of the prophets. He links it directly to the Pharisees that he was talking to. Well, now people say, well, let's not talk about disagreeable things. I think he was, of course, pretty rough with them. Well, either he knew something about Phariseeism that we don't know, or he was a terrible character assassin and libeler and everything else. Until you read the Talmud, you don't know how right he was. There isn't anybody on earth that knows how to place that religion the way he did. It is simply an abyss of filth and degradation and horror. And then you see, as Father Steskowitz can tell you, the Catholic Church is loaded up with this brotherhooding, this ecumenism, which means brotherhood with the Antichrist, after all. Amos says, hate the evil and love the good. Christ said, no man can serve two masters. Either you'll hate the one and love the other, or despise the one and hold the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. But now that's the New World Church. And didn't Paul say it, that they would have a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof from such turn away, that they would have, they wouldn't stand sound doctrine? Now it's anything butterflies, la 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 la. That's ecumenism. And when all these rabbis greet a certain potentate that's coming to Chicago, you know who I mean. This printed thing that I have will the Pharisees throttle 500 million Christians in 1965 was a thing that we sent out to 9,000 or 10,000 Catholic clergy all over the world, including the whole ecumenical, the whole council. And it is simply that they have moved in to take over from the inside. But don't think it hasn't happened to your particular church. It has. I happen to be an Episcopalian. I don't brag about it, but of course I do think that Bishop Pike has lovely ideas in the San Francisco Cathedral. He has these barefoot dancers for the communion service, kicking their heels up in the air. I think that's just ducky, And but there's nowhere to go. I mean, there is nowhere to go except up to Kenneth Goff's camp where you can speak the truth. Isn't it true? They're all at the time of the falling away until people won't know where to turn for anything because it's all penetrated. But those that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits, and those who understand among the people, Daniel said, shall instruct many and bring many to righteousness and shine as the stars forever, but the wicked shall not understand. They think by sheer force and brutality they can crush righteousness and God and decency and justice, and with a lying exterior take over the whole world. And they're doing it. But underneath there's a crust rising. There's one rising up here. It's in you people. You've come to get strength for your own battle. And how shall they overcome them? Well, I'll take the book. 12:11 of Christ's revelation to John on the island of Patmos. in 96 AD, he said, "They shall overcome the Antichrist by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, who love not their lives unto the death." And what is there to live for if you have to live under the heel of the Antichrist? Why does anybody worry about dying? I only pray daily to have a sound mind and a sound body and be able to witness to the truth, because there isn't anything else left. You're not going to own property. You're not going to leave anything to your children. All you're going to leave is a bunch of slavery for them, unless you open your mouth. And this thing is going to be victorious on the side of Christ. But as James says, faith without works is dead. You can say, "I believe, but just rapture me up and hoist me gently, Lord, because I don't want to be jiggled when I'm taken up to sit." And I like orchids, and I like a nice soft seat, and I like nice incense and everything, but I don't want to hear anything disagreeable. And then bring me down in unearned glory, then I can reign. Well, that isn't the way it's going to be. No, it isn't going to be that way. And would it be fair to all the millions who have died as Christians if just a few of us lugs should be taken out of all struggle? One man stopped my bulletins, about 9-10 years ago. He said he thought by the signs of the times that the rapture was soon here and that he was going to be raptured and there was nothing he was going to do about it, so he was just turning his back on the whole thing. Well, now, Christ said, "Many shall say, Lord, Lord, who will not enter in." And they'll say, "Well, haven't we done things in your name and all?" But he said, "I know you not. Take up your cross and follow me. And he who will not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me and cannot be my disciple." That's pretty much on the nose, isn't it?
Amen.
Yes. Now, if any of you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer anything that you're interested in, if I'm able to. Got anything on your mind? Got something on the brain? Well, you're in the midst of this whole mess.
Could you tell us anything about any of the court cases that you have to go through?
Oh, yes, of course they were going to have, you see, we went in with Soviet Russia, and they were going to make it out that you had to be a Nazi if you were an anti-communist. And she'll never forget when that trial opened. We had first 3 indictments. I was in the first one, never came to trial at all, and the second one we licked to a frazzle with 1 week in Washington under Judge Atkins. The third one, they were going to make a long parade of it, and they took men like, he wrote the Tainted Context, Colonel Sanctuary. He's a Bible scholar and teacher and a patriot and all. And then they had some little Nazis that I'd never known or heard of, and I mean, they hadn't done anything wrong, but they were going to try to put the Nazi flavor into it, don't you see, and then make 30 people all a bunch of criminals and throw them into jail for 10 years and $10,000 fine. And when I first went there, I went with my husband, an attorney, and there was a gentleman with a scarf around his neck, and he was standing outside the little courtroom. It was Father Steskowitz. Bless his heart. And as it went on, I tell you, I had my secret weapon. They appointed the lawyers, you see, because most of them didn't have the money to hire a lawyer. Only 2 had paid lawyers. And every lawyer that got up, I'd say, "He hath put down the mighty from their seats and exalted them of low degree. Be with us in this courtroom, Lord, for this is not our case. This is the cause of liberty for all Americans. Help this man, put words in his mouth." I prayed for every man that got up. And there were others that prayed for them too. And those men became rather inspired. And the jury is the funniest thing. They were picked supposedly to just bums rush us down the road to the penitentiary, And they became so taken by the fact that there wasn't any evidence against anybody, that when my daughter would come to the court, and my son was in the army uniform, he'd come, they'd say, "Well, it's nice to see you back. How are you?" This was the jury. And then I found the 10 that were in prison that couldn't pay their fine. You had to have bailed, you see, a bond to stay out of jail. I never went to jail because I, thank God, was able to raise the $500 and stay out. Well, I found that one poor guy stood up with a piece of spoiled sausage, all white, just white with spoilage, and a dry piece of bread, and he said, Your Honor, this is my lunch this noon. This is what they give us, and if I eat it, I throw up. And when I looked how thin and pale, and the other thing they did to help us was they took the picture of these prisoners they brought over in handcuffs getting out of the I'm describing my trial in Washington. And so they took the pictures of them looking like wretches. They wouldn't let them shave. And they had one little woman who was in the thing. She says, I'm wearing my nightie to court. They wouldn't let me dress. She had a coat over it. And they tried to make them look like a wretched bunch of bums, you see. And then in every motion picture house in Washington, they showed this picture of these unshaven, bummy-looking people. Well, any man's bummy-looking if he isn't allowed to clean himself up at all, you know. Well, I made up my mind that that was a crime to have spoiled sausage. So I began, if I were sitting next to you or back of you, I'd say, there was a prisoner's roll, the 10 up in front. I'd say, push these up under the seats to the prisoners. And I'd get them candy bars and peanuts and stuff like that. And I'd push and you'd push, and finally they'd get up there. Well, by and by, the bailiffs became friendly. They saw there was nothing wrong. When I first went there, the day that Father Zaskowitz was there, this man sat out there and he says, this is a big Nazi trial. I said, don't you think it. I'm not a Nazi. I'm not for Nazism. I said, this is nothing of the kind. Well, when they all became convinced of it, well, they finally fixed a dining room up downstairs, the bailiffs did. We called it, in the bullpen they called it. And every day I used to go over, and I'd go in before the court started in the morning with the bread and cheese and the cold meat and stuff that were cold, you know. You can't cook when you're in court. And hand that in. And then at noon I'd go over and get a great big box of pie and ice cream and hot coffee from the restaurant where we all ate. And it defied every law of any kind of court case. You're not supposed the jury to say anything to the defendants, you know, and the lawyers aren't supposed to say anything to the jury. We're here to sit two lawyers and a couple of defendants and everything else, and one of the jurors maybe would help me with my box of pie and ice cream and go over there. And I'd go down to the basement part, and they'd open the door, and the prisoners would say, hi, like this, you know, and then I'd give it to the bailiff, and then he'd hand them in the food. Well, they began to fatten up, and I felt like Mama when the babies are, you know, looking pretty perky and got pink bows on them and everything. They say, my, the prisoners are looking so much better. The poor devils they were meaning to starve them to death. That's what they meant to do. And I used to send them home for the weekend. The bailiffs got kind of easy on them. I mean, knowing that there was nothing against any of them. I'd send them home with all kinds of stuff that they could smuggle in a briefcase, you see, to eat over the Saturday and Sunday. And they plumped up. And after we had the final hearing and had the whole thing dismissed, I saw some of these former prisoners, and I said, oh, I didn't know you boys were going to be here. What is it you want? They said, we want you, meaning, as the errand girl would go get, I'd say, what do you want at recess? Well, I need some shaving things, and I haven't got a pen, I haven't any paper, and what would you like? Well, they wanted some Spanish books. I remember I spent $16 on Spanish books for them. Then I got them fleece-lined slippers for the cold jail floors, you know. They gave them, now for instance, a man who's been a writer all his life, like little Vierick, they gave him a cell with no window and no light in it, so he couldn't possibly read anything, and kept them in solitary confinement, where the murderers and the pickpockets and the thieves were allowed out in the sunshine. I've got a picture in my table drawer, Father. If you ever come to Chicago, I'll show you the picture of these prisoners, where they finally got a chance to have a picture taken of them taking a sun bath in the middle of the summer. We went on trial in April, you see, and it lasted till the judge died in November, where they were getting a nice sun bath out in the yard for the prisoners. But that's what when you tell me about that woman, it was a political frame-up. And finally, did you know that they also asked to have that trial called off because it said they were making it a trial of the Jews. Now, for instance, the day that we introduced the genealogy of Roosevelt, every juror had gotten educated to the point where, well, the A&P man said to me, I think they're making anti-Semites out of these jurors. And they read every word, and just like this, then handed it on, and they read every word, you know. And, oh boy, the stuff we introduced into that trial. And they got heartily in favor, and you know, the guy who runs, he was on the Federal Reserve Board, and he owned the Washington Post. He was the one that sent his reporter to write to all of us. Now, don't use your common sense if you want to hear about the trial. The idea was that they sent, for instance, I got a letter that they wanted a leaflet. It was a 10-cent leaflet, and I sent it to Washington. Now, by constructive presence, meaning imagination, they used an old bootlegger case that by imagination you could be a place. We all conspired. Now, a lot of these fellows I didn't know at all that were in the sedition trial, but presumably we all conspired together on the same day in the city of Washington. Now, none of us were in Washington on that day, but they held that we were there by constructive presence or imagination. Don't get reasonable now, whatever you do. And then one proof of it was that when my leaflet arrived in Washington, you see, from Chicago, I arrived with the leaflet by imagination, see. You can't beat that, can you? Well, we finally got the whole thing dismissed, but it was the biggest farce in history. And they finally, since it was leading into a regular Jewish revelation course, one man used to come in from Philadelphia. I used to speak quite often in Philadelphia, and he was a lawyer, and he'd come in to lick his chops. He never saw anything done like it in his life, and then nobody ever else will, because it didn't have a semblance of law to it. And when Judge Belitha Laws dismissed it, he said it was a crime that 30 people had been held all that length of time without one piece of evidence being presented by the prosecution against any defendant. Now, what they were intending to do, and I found out later, I get all the American Jewish yearbooks. That's the American Jewish Committee, which are the lords of the world. Believe me, after 30 years of work on this, that they are. And they told how they were having these mob trials all over France, hundreds of thousands in every one of those countries, right straight through Europe. Well, look what they did with the Patriot. What was the Patriot of France? You know, who was the hero of the World War I? They put him on the island of Europe. Huh? Pétain. Mm-hmm. They had Pétain as a prisoner. When de Gaulle, the great so-and-so, came in, he had 1 million French Christians jailed. I have French friends over there. Everybody I know that writes the way we people do here was in jail there. He had 105,000 killed by giving the names and address over the British Broadcasting Company, where he was there with his flyers that had never flown, the Rothschilds from Britain. Now, I have documentation on this. 105,000 were murdered by giving their name and address and picking you out at night and get them. Then he comes in and liberates France by jailing 1 million French Christians. You see? That is the system. So they had run that system everywhere. And my prayer was, of course I didn't know that then until they wrote it up later, but that the cause of all American liberty wouldn't go down the drain with taking these people as a beginner. Now, as Mr. Stokes said, nobody was safe in this country. If they could have convicted people like me, who have never stood for anything but Christianity and Americanism, and many of the others like Colonel Sanctuary and all, who've been nothing but Bible Christians, if they can convict them, anybody who said anything against that dirty bum Stalin could be sent over the road for endless years, you see. It was a crucial test. And it lasted and lasted till the old judge croaked on the bench. And so then that ended the sedition trial. But it wasn't pleasant to sit there for nearly 8 months, 5 hours a day, 5 days a week, and have your children, my daughter going to school in Kenilworth, and have to get home a weekend once in a while to see whether she was getting along all right. I had an old housekeeper, fortunately. But they intended it for all of you. But they've kind of gotten blunted at it, and They don't want people like you that know anything about this subject to get on the witness stand. Is there any question? Well, at least I hope none of you get in one of those things. But I thank God that we had a happy outcome of the whole thing. Oh yes, yes. But now, you see, they're fencing up things. I'm not going to go into this, but they're fencing up two political parties for you, sides that are like a playpen for the kiddies. You can have a mad fight and a rush and competition inside the playpen, but you won't get anywhere. You'll never get over to the desk where the papers are, you know. You'll just get around the lot in the playpen. And I'm afraid I'll step on somebody's toes if I say it, but they're rigging it up again for us to have nobody to vote for except one of their own. Yes, you know that. Well, I can tell you now, for instance, the Louis L. Strauss says that he is the financial advisor to the Rockefellers in Who's Who in America. The Rockefellers financed 1313 East 60th Street in Chicago, a great big building for collectivist organizations. It is run by a board composed, the PAS, composed of the officers of the National Municipal League, and so on, of which Goldwater is one of the officers. The headquarters of the National Municipal League is in the Karl Pforzheimer building in New York. Karl Pforzheimer is treasurer of the National Municipal League, and Karl Pforzheimer is on the executive committee of the American Jewish Committee, the Lords of High Command, which also Louis L. Strauss is on this thing. So Goldwater says that the greatest patriot in the country is Louis L. Strauss, and has a YAF meeting hailing him and awarding him as a patriot. Now then, he's having his new Liberty outfit with Louis L. Strauss as the sponsor of it, and he tried to get Lucius Clay, under whom the Talmud was printed in Germany, as commander in the Army. The Army printed the Talmud. Maybe you don't know that, but they did. They paid for it. It was a good of them, wasn't it? In other words, it's 6 of one and half a dozen of another. Do you see what I mean? It comes right in like this, so I win, you lose. Now, I could give you endless detail on it, but I won't bore you to death. And then our kiddies get all excited because they don't get their man, or they do get their man, you know. But what we need is the kind of enlightenment that you people are getting here. Know your stuff, know your Bible, know what you're in, and open your mouth. Is there anything else I can bore you with?
Would you comment how I've been asked this question, and I didn't really know how to explain how Roosevelt, the name Roosevelt, is that correct?
Well, I believe it was. They were Dutch and Roosevelt, and but they changed it.
How does that tie in, though, with Teddy? Now, if the FDR family were...
Yeah, I know. They were cousins. And Teddy did some very peculiar things, too, regardless of what you and I have been told about him. We won't go into that phase of the thing. Maybe he had to, I don't know. But he was not all pure. No. And funny thing, Churchill and Roosevelt were distant cousins, as well as another guy that's such a hero I won't touch him. But Churchill, I gave quite a memorial number to him in the January issue. And here's another thing that most people don't see, that so-called capitalism and communism are mates. Oh, you say, don't be silly. Why? Communism is against capitalism. Yes, They stir up the thing to stir things up and take over. Now, in this last bulletin of mine, I have right out of the Communist Worker the story by Joseph North. I didn't know that he was a Jew, but how his long friendship with Barney Baruch had gone on, and how they'd had such long talks, and how Barney had wanted to finance Lenin, and how, though he was worth over $100 million, well, why? I'll tell you, to brief down more than 30 years of labor, communism is the cow barn state into which we cows are lured with some sort of Social Security clover or something. Once inside, the iron curtains dropped on us, and if we don't milk well enough, we're beefed. You've got to give the cows something to get them in. Now you'll notice that you're getting a subsidy for everything from Medicare down to, I like that poverty thing. If you can have up to $10,000 a year. Did you know, Father, that if your income is up to $10,000 a year, you can still get this poverty allotment? Yeah. Well, don't you think we all want to apply? Because I don't pay income tax. It's not necessary when everything's counted up. Hasn't been for 20 years. Now, look, wouldn't that be nice if we could get in on the... Well, in other words, isn't it the old thing, Father, of the bread and circuses in Rome? Haul them into Rome and throw them the food and give them a circus, and they'll vote themselves out of existence. That's what's happening. And the poor dumb doves don't know. You know, Christ said we should be as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves, but he didn't say we were to be as dumb as doves. And the dumb doves go after this stuff, and they don't know that they've got to pay for it by increasing taxation and inflation and everything else that's going to take it away from them. And that's what we're in the process of. It's, the whole story's being done all over again, isn't it? You can see that. Anybody got anything on their minds?
I've been contending with the same as you say for a long time, that capitalism is a Jewish invention. It's still one of the other opposites of communism, but they're both together.
Absolutely.
And we're not going back to a free enterprise system because there is no such animal now. They can run out of a peanut stand if you start one if they want to.
The American Jewish Committee has Lazar Frères, the Rothschilds, Kuhn-Loeb and Company, the Lehmans, every big banking house. I did the Octopus in 1940, a book I put under a pen name. And when you sit with who's who in Jewry and who's who in the United States and find out that Jared Swope, for instance, here has the this there, and in Germany he's got that, and in another place he's got that, and he's got French Airlines, and he's got that. You begin to see the picture of the 18th chapter of the Revelation, where all the chariots and all the wheat and all of this are under one set of hands. Just sit down and do a day's research for one guy that you've read about in the paper and look him up in Who's Who and see his holdings. This Lucius Clay, of course, what you people don't realize is that a practice with a little shotgun makes you fitted to be a bank president. And Lucius Clay came home, parked his little gun away from being a little army commander, and now he's head of the, I don't like to say the words, I don't remember, Chase National and the Political Bank and this big industry and that big industry. He doesn't know any more about banking than the baby over here, or like I do in running a bank. But they give them high positions, and then they have a big name that they can operate under, you know? It's just amazing. Of course, I mustn't get on the subject for another big hero that did the same thing too, because after they built up, you remember when Christ said, "Woe unto you when all men speak well of you"? Because it's usually the Pharisee-controlled press and mass media of information that distributes a picture of somebody. And when they say, ta-dum, ta-dum, tum-tum, you know, you say, oh yes, must be a great man, they're making a big fuss over him. Like when Churchill died, wouldn't you have thought part of the Trinity had succumbed?
I often used the term the prostituted news media, press, TV shows. Always use that word.
Yes. And they absolutely keep out the stuff that they don't want in. You never read about Kenneth Goff in the press, have you? No.
I read it in Drew Pearson.
Prostituted press.
Isn't it the truth? And then when they chime the bells for some big bloke, you know. I wonder why they didn't make as big a fuss over Barney as they did over Churchill. Because he was the power that pushed them for so long. Well, I think this has been wonderful. I think it's very inspiring to hear this talk here. I'm just going to kind of continue from where you were. You know, speaking of the coming of the Antichrist, you know, in 1 Thessalonians 5, it says that when of the times and seasons no man knows, but this know, that when they shall say peace and security, look out, for destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape from it. The interesting thing about the Antichrist, as we know, Satan is transformed into an angel of light. What wonder that his ministers do likewise, whose end shall be according to their works. Now, everything is done in a lovey-dovey way in our new world government that we're under. And I have all of you a copy of the charter of your government? Don't think, my salute to the flag is, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it once stood under God. Now, but a state flag in a godless red world government with liberty and justice for none. Now, in this beautiful charter, you see the do-gooder ladies that go to women's clubs and all, and they have a little bit of the United Nations, and it's for peace, you see. It's for peace. And when they read all these pretty words, but this is the most diabolical little thing that ever was. You all ought to have a charter, and you all ought to have it marked. Peace and security is used 32 times in this diabolical little charter. Now, this was drawn up, and I can prove it. If you'd give me the time, I'd get the American Jewish yearbooks and show you that the Pharisees drew up this world government in every detail. Before there was a World War II, they had it all set up that there was to be a World War II, and Max Warburg, who was the payoff man for Lenin and Trotsky in Germany, came over here to the United States, and he was met by Louis Lichtenstein Strauss of Kuhn-Loeb and Company and placed on the honorary American Jewish Committee. And they tell you, I have all those books lined up in tons of, I've got bookcases if nothing else, showing how, all right, fine, showing how they had these post-war committees to set up this thing. Now, when you hear that Alger Hiss drew it up, don't fall for that stuff, folks. He's just the spittoon emptier for the hotel. That's all. And, you know, it's the management is not ever seen. You have some little pill out in front. But if more than 30 years of intensive study mean anything, I would say that what the innocent-sounding American Jewish Committee are the lords of earth, and they best match the description of this seventh red world government that makes war against the Lamb, but the Lamb shall overcome them, for he's Lord of lords and King of kings, and those that are with him and chosen are faithful. The terms of the whole thing, beginning with the 18th chapter of the Revelation, beginning with the 11th verse, tells you all the trade of the world that goes under this one power. All the chariots, well, you can't say Packards or Fords or anything like that, but all the chariots, all the wheat, all the sheep, all the ships, all the ivory, all the gold, all the this, all the that, all under one pair of hands and under Gat. Well, my son-in-law for 20 years had charge of many states for a steel company that was put out of business by Gat. That's General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. If you'd ever get into the yearbooks of the United Nations and find the control over some 60,000 items by 1959 had been changed in their tariff relationship in this country by Gat. You say, well, what is by Gat? Well, by Gat is General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. And you say, well, I don't think that affects anything. Well, it affected my son-in-law, and he's had to go to work for another steel company. He was in the cable department of the Roebling Steel Company, which the Japanese steel put out of business under the United Nations. Now, this is all subterranean. The way this world is organized is dizzy in trade, in every power over everybody, over everything. And it says that no man shall buy nor sell without the mark of the beast or the number of his name. Well, now, I happen to have gone into this Pharisee business for a good many years, and they have a system called gematria, which has as long, it was going it in Christ's time, and when it says the number of his name would be 666, we none of us have realized anything that it could mean. But under gematria, I have the scale in one of my bulletins. I printed it. It's from the Kabbalah. And I cooked up a word. It doesn't mean a thing, but it adds up to 666, and that's Natbeir, N-A-T-B-E-I-R. The word means nothing. But I'm just as convinced as I stand here today that when we come down to the finish, we're going to find that the man of sin, the Antichrist, the big shot that's going to rule in the Jerusalem temple, which for the first time has been rebuilt in 1958, very surreptitiously and endowed and everything else by this guy from London, Isaac Wolfson, that the Queen made Sir Isaac Wolfson. All these peddlers, you know, up the alleys get to be lords and sirs. And they have everything. They have a mikvah, they have all place for the rehabilitation of the Sanhedrin and everything else there. And I believe in my last bulletin, I had a little thing from the Jewish Sentinel, which I thought was significant, and you as Bible students would think was significant. It said was intended to sound facetious to cover up the seriousness of it. There's a party in Israel that are trying to reestablish a kingdom. And they have a fellow that they think fills the bill. And they're applying to the Knesset, that's their parliament, for recognition. And I just wrote in before it was photostated, the Antichrist. Because when we get this guy that's going to come out and in his estate, as Daniel describes him so well, shall regard no God but the God of forces. And our better professors and all in the atheistic realm of higher learning, you know, don't need anything but a sprinkle of this and a sprinkle of that, and they create human life any day. You know, that's the new knowledge. Well, it's nuts. Well, now, in this little charter, everything starts with peace and security. Just so sweet. It says to unite, and I've marked my charter all through 32 times, peace and security. But there's always something in it. Now, it's like I say to you, now, Dr. Lovell, I'm going to take your purse from you in the interest of peace and security, and you may have any use you like of it, providing I allow you to. And well, no, just what does that mean? Means I get the purse and you don't get a darn thing unless I say you can have it. It should be studied. Now, articles. Now, when you're talking about your civil rights acts of 57 and of the later one in 61 and all, it is only mandatory under the United Nations Charter, which became the supreme law of the land in 1945 when the Senate 89-2 voted to adopt the charter as a treaty. Now, we had a man named Alexander Hamilton who was, according to the research I've done, was the bastard son of a Jew by the name of Levine. And he was highly revered by that Pharisee gang, and it was he that fought to put in Article 6 in the Constitution, and he fought for it. Marilyn Allen got after me, and she said, people should consider the intent of the Constitution. Well, the intent of the use of the Constitution was shown by Alexander Hamilton, for as soon as the Constitution had been, after the Treaty of Peace between England and the United States and the Constitution was in effect, he went to fight on the Rutgers case. Now, Mrs. Rutgers was a widow who had some property occupied by the British for a number of years, and the states passed laws, our states here passed laws, that a person could get rent and payment for the property that had been used by the enemy during the war. And she had a case in court, and of course the American colonists were all for her getting something. Her factory and her house and everything had been occupied by the British. They ought to pay something for several years of it. And who went against her? Alexander Hamilton. On the guise that Article 6 of the Constitution made a treaty the supreme law of the land, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding, and a treaty of peace had been passed since then, which nullified all the state laws giving you the right to get back some rent for your property that the British had held, you see. He fought in the courts. It wasn't popular that he did it, but he did it. Now, it has been known by the Pharisees. I have in my book, The Plot Against Christianity, photostats of the State Department papers and also of the Jewish Kahila of 1917 and 18. Now, I'm frank to tell you that I didn't know about that clause in the Constitution. I had no idea. But they knew it in 1917 and in their report, which is the equivalent of the American Jewish Committee, that it had been necessary to break the Russian trade treaty because under the Constitution a treaty is the supreme law of the land. That goes over your ears and over your hair unless you know that the United Nations Charter, a complete new government, a world government, was set up as a treaty. 89-2 in 1945. Now, Articles 1, 13, I'll tell you what Article 6 is. All treaties made